Good evening and welcome to the Town of Corte Madera Planning Commission for Tuesday, April 9th. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Wolf.
Commissioner Metcalf?
Here.
Commissioner Bundy?
Here.
Commissioner Chase?
Here.
Commissioner Lee?
Here.
Commissioner Bendel?
Thank you. All right, if there's anybody in this audience tonight that would like to comment on something that is not on tonight's agenda, you are free to do so for 3 minutes. So, nobody rising to the occasion, so we will close the public comment section and we'll go right to our new hearing. This is a proposed hotel floor area bonus ordinance. Consideration and possible action by the Planning Commission regarding a recommendation to the Town Council for a zoning ordinance amendment creating a floor area ratio bonus that would permit additional FAR for hotel projects meeting specified conditions and findings on property greater than 1 acre in size in C3, C4, and MX zoning districts. Mr. Wolf has labored long and hard over this, so
It's the commission's. Thank you, Chairman Chase and members of the Planning Commission. I wanted to just this evening go over a little bit of the background for the benefit of those in the audience who are here tonight and those who may be watching on video as well. And then talk a little bit about some modifications since the last meeting that staff has made and is recommending this evening, and then move on into any questions that you may have. So with that, as you mentioned, we are discussing a possible recommendation to the Town Council this evening regarding a zoning ordinance amendment. And as you mentioned, that's related to a zoning, we call it an FAR bonus is what we're calling it, floor area ratio bonus for hotel uses in C3, C4, and MX zoning districts. So this is sort of the culmination of several meetings we've had to this point, really starting with a discussion at the Town Council in February of last year, when staff discussed potential policy direction or sought some direction and guidance from the Town Council regarding hotels in general and the existing floor area that exists and floor area that is permitted for hotel uses in the Town of Corte Madera. And at that time, there was a consensus among the Town Council that staff and the Planning Commission, but staff should start the process of really discussing how to modify the existing ordinance that we have related to hotel development in the town, as it was of vital economic importance. It was seen as amenities for town residences and businesses. And also there was a recognition, I think at the time, that just the existing FAR was inadequate to really attract attract redevelopment or new development to the town. So with that, we embarked on a process of discussion with the Planning Commission, and staff brought forth not only the Town Council staff report or the staff report that was done for the Town Council, but brought forth a potential framework in July of last year in the summertime. And we discussed a potential approach on highlighting specific criteria, sort of categories with which additional floor area would be permitted. And I think it was also clear from the Town Council at that time that there was it was a good policy would promote additional floor area, but only under certain conditions. And so we were trying to identify under what circumstances that additional FAR might be allowed. We talked about 4 main categories within which a hotel of more significant size might be permitted, and that included environmental sustainability, design being critical, and aesthetics, sort of what we've termed, or I've termed, community integration, and how that hotel facility might be integrated or provide additional amenities on site for the community, and then improvements to a public realm being another category, and that includes things like going above and beyond for enhancements or to the public right-of-way in some fashion, whether it's pedestrian amenities or bicycle improvements, so on and so forth. We had some good direction and good discussion in July, and I think the commission requested that staff go back and really try to refine the approach and the framework to provide a little bit more definition and try to create some more objective standards that would provide more certainty in some ways, not only to an applicant, but also provide some more guidance for the decision makers, whether that would be the planning commission in this case, when an application for this additional FAR comes before the commission. And so with that, we embarked and tried to create a framework. Staff created a framework to create such additional, a framework within which additional FAR could be allocated based on meeting certain identified standards and requirements. That was presented to the Planning Commission on November 13th, 2018 of last year. And at that time, there were additional comments provided, but in general, the Commission's requested that we come forward with an ordinance addressing, based on the framework that we had, but also addressing some additional comments that the Planning Commission had at that time. And so here we are before you today with essentially a very similar framework as to what the Commission saw in November of last year. In fact, it's identical in terms of the framework. There were a couple of just changes that I wanted to note as we put this together and actually translated the discussion and sort of the conceptual framework into an actual ordinance and a text that would go into our zoning code and our municipal code. Sort of in response to some of the comments, we did rearrange and put design and aesthetics at the top of the list, just to add emphasis, I think, in terms of going through the different criteria and the different findings that need to be made in order to obtain this floor area bonus or any bonus above 0.34 FAR. In addition, we did speak with Public Works Department, and I think their approach was, look, we have capital improvements throughout town, capital improvement projects that may be near or associated with or nearby certain developments that frankly would be great to get a contribution to, and that should be considered as a potential way to meet the requirements or the findings under this zoning code. And so you'll see that's been added as well to, and it's an example of a way that could be satisfied, that finding could be satisfied, obviously. And then there was added language within the condition that required the preliminary review and a study session before the Planning Commission, and just making sure that it was clear that the intent or one of the primary purposes of that meeting would be to evaluate the requested floor area above 0.34 FAR that an applicant was requesting at that meeting against the different findings. So there would actually be a conversation about whether or not the way in which the applicant was proposing to get to a higher FAR actually was on a preliminary level, was that able to be achieved in a way that the commission felt was adequate. Those were three the three changes based on comments. We also included a map, which I think was a really good exercise to do, an attachment, I believe it's attachment 3 to your staff report, that just showed, based on this proposed ordinance, which, as you know, is for C3, C4, and MX districts, of which there's only an MX1 at this point, importantly also this provision that a lot had to be greater than 1 acre in size in order to apply for this bonus, where that would actually apply in town. And so we did add that to attachment to the staff report and included it in attachment 3. And I have a slide here if you'd like to walk through that a little bit. And then finally, I think there were other main substantive changes to the framework. Was the elimination of a provision actually in the conditions section. We tried to sort of think of how to include sea level rise and the projected rise in tides, and sea level and flooding in the future into this ordinance. But after further review, I think there were sort of implementation challenges with that. We have some good information about actually where inundation might occur in the future, but translating that to a specific performance requirement when you get to an actual building permit application was going to be challenging. And I think while it's still a challenge, and there are, I shouldn't say challenge, it's still something that I think is important to consider and we should be considering as a town, given that we have and given that it's sort of a town-wide issue and it's not just for hotels, it really should be applied to all commercial and residential properties. We have a climate adaptation study underway that we felt was really the proper vehicle to address this issue moving forward. In other words, right now we have FEMA maps that say, you're in the floodplain and therefore you have to get your, flood protection up to 11 at the design flood elevation or the base flood elevation, which means either you're raising everything above that, or for commercial properties, you're putting in flood protection barriers. But those barriers are also based on an actual height of which those have to be designed and built to. I think we will endeavor to incorporate sea level rise and sort of requirements for new construction into the climate adaptation plan and study and address it in that way, or in that study. So we felt taking it out of this ordinance was appropriate at this time, and addressing it in that way was a better way to handle it. And then we also discussed, and staff discussed at the last meeting, considering the C2 zoning district as another zoning district where this ordinance may apply. And in fact, I'll mention we noticed it in that way as well in the notice. But really, in looking at the general plan, there are certain maximum floor area ratios already set for the town center and the village. They have separate land use designations that set maximum floor area ratios for those two sites, and do not permit, without changing the general plan, higher floor area ratios for those two sites. And so at this point in time, whereas these other districts are all in the MX, the mixed use commercial land use designation in the general plan, which does permit going above that if the zoning, going above the 0.34 FAR if the zoning ordinance permits it. So there was if we were going to do that, we'd need to change the general plan. And then furthermore, the village actually does have about 130,000 excess square feet of floor area at this point in time. So there is room in any case to develop if somebody wanted to develop, or if that was sort of the proposed at the village, there was excess capacity there today to build a hotel. Again, all of these hotels we're talking about are conditional use permits. They'd still have the design review requirements. They'd still have environmental review to do, et cetera, et cetera. So we're just talking about one component of that approval process that would allow for additional FAR. So with that, I'll stop and take any questions you may have. I did prepare a draft resolution for you. Attachment 1 includes a draft resolution recommending to the Corte Madera Town Council approval of a zoning ordinance amendment related to floor area bonus for hotels/motels in C3, C4, and MX zoning districts. So you can look at that. I want to thank Commissioner Bendel did point out a couple of editing and typos in here that I can take care of if in fact the commission wishes to refer this and approve this resolution and refer it to the town council. And I did that without going through the slides, but I will say I do have plenty of slides as well. I mean, to go through. We've been through these before, so I wasn't going to go through them unless we need them for reference. But the red area on the map just shows the brown is the C3 district. You see brown is along Casa Buena where some of the car dealerships are. Also a little sliver of it here, which we know is now being developed for Amy's drive-through. And then there's another C3 area at the very northern part of the town. C4 is only located in this area, in the sort of San Clemente, Paradise Drive area. And MX1 is located along Tamil Vista Boulevard. And then I'll go to the acres, the map that shows, let's see, this map. So this is a map showing those parcels that are 1 acre minimum lot size. This is based on existing lots, and I'll just mention that it's a little, I mean, it's accurate, but it should be pointed out that, for example, like this parcel, there's 2 parcels in this area where this car dealership is, and this yellow one, they're all owned by the same entity, so it could be relatively easy to create a lot. Sorry, where am I? Where's
That
my
also happens up at the top.
Yeah, exactly. There's several parcels up here that are owned by one entity, and then I also noted, also down in this area where the Herc Rentals is as well. Also, those lots could easily be merged in order to take advantage and be greater than 1 acre. So this is, there's more lots, put it that way, that I think could be relatively easily assembled into a lot that'd be great, more than 1 acre in size. And I just, for purposes of comparison, I did a map of somewhere back here, 0.75 acres, just because I wanted to see what that picked up. And you do pick up a couple here, but again, those are owned by the same entity that owns this is Big Five, an office building on the corner, then the fitness, all owned by the same entity, actually, who also owns 200 Nellen, but that's across the street. And it picks up a few more properties on Paradise Drive, but really not much other than that, with the 0.75 minimum lot size.
Okay, great. And well, these slides are helpful, but in the zoning map, the Baylands risk overlay on this that's part of this flood issue, or is that's a soils issue?
To be perfectly honest, I mean, it was originally developed to address sort of the geotechnical issues and some of the flooding and the soil stability issues, I think, in those areas, some of liquefaction as well. When it was first actually adopted I believe in the early 70s. The actual requirements of that district are pretty standard in terms of now what you're required to do and what you're required to analyze and assess for building permits purposes. But yeah, so those don't go away. I mean, those would still be there. We're not talking about any changes to the underlying zoning districts themselves or the overlay zoning districts such as the Bayland risk zone overlay district. It's really, as you note in the attachment, this would be inserted in a general provisions of the commercial districts, so 18.12. 050 and sort of inserted in the first section of the commercial zoning district section, where it just will highlight special considerations in these zoning districts for hotel uses. And similarly, that's the same way it's approached in MX districts. So no change to the underlying zoning districts themselves.
All right. So I first want to say this is a superb staff report. So to you and Martha, is she here? No. So
It's moral support over here.
It's really quite well written and quite well organized.
Yes.
So kudos to you for doing that. It's great writing and so forth. I don't know if the other commissioners feel that way, but I think it's well done and well prepared. So,
Yes.
does anyone have any questions for Adam at this point? Phyllis?
Just one out of curiosity, I'm looking at the staff report going back to February for the council, where on page 6 you list the sizes of the different hotels, and it shows the
Yes.
Best Western as being, the Budget Inn as being .27, excluding
Right.
the garages. That is obviously the old configuration.
Yes.
Do you have any idea off the top of your head as to what the percentage is now?
It's 0.34.
It is .34.
I think maybe 0.33, but it's right at the.
Okay,
it's
gone-
going up to the.
That's what I thought, because, there aren't garages, but it's also a better configuration. Now, the reason I'm asking is my only concern, and I really like the idea of the incentives. I like the idea, and I'm thinking what they just did at the residences at the preserve, where they're putting money into fixing the roadway along there. I mean, there are a lot of good things. I am just wondering if .34, looking at what exists in the other jurisdictions, may be a little low, and if we could consider making the base for hotels only in that C4, C3, and whatever else as maybe .40 as the base you could start from, rather than the .34, but it would have to be clearly delineated that it is for hotel use only and not for any other commercial use.
Okay.
So that would be sort of in conflict with other uses in an MX or a C3 or 4, right? So that the hotel portion of that zoning would then only, that Phyllis is discussing, would only apply toward a hotel use on that property,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, I think it's a comment.
Yeah.
If you certainly worth, you're welcome to discuss it further and have some comments on that. It wasn't something that was discussed by, I think at our last meetings, but certainly that's an approach that could be taken.
And still have incentives if they want to do
Exceeds
more.
.4.
Yes.
I understand.
But use
I
that
understand.
as the base, because I just think we may, to do a hotel, and I'm thinking about the budget in that is being done now, and that's why I asked what the percentage was, would be very difficult on a .34 when you consider the outbuildings, the parking, all the other things that you would do, which is different than if you just have an office building or a retail.
Right. So,
These are small ones.
I'll respond. Bob, do you have any questions for staff here?
One of my comments would be that in looking at capital improvement projects in the flood zone, one of the things that we could request would be contributions that would go to sea level rise management, which is really maintaining, raising our levees, as well as improvements or enhancements to pump stations. So that would be something that I think would always potentially be there. And the other thing is, some of the categories, you've listed all of the categories to get points in. Some of them seem to, would spill over into a different category, but I'm not sure if that really is of concern. they're probably going to get their maximum points if they're doing that, such as environmental sustainability might be providing employee housing, or even Red Cross approved disaster shelters with supplies. But I think what you've laid out with all of the options in each of them, this will work fine. I think this is a really good overall plan that gives discretion, but the ability to increase the floor area ratio with good design, good thinking, good planning. So, thanks.
All right, thank you. Charles?
So I have a couple different questions. So it isn't particularly to this, but it's just a point of curiosity. The 130,000 for the town center, is that split between the three different entities, or is that just
The village, yeah.
the village?
Sorry,
So is it split, or right, the village? Sorry, the village. Is that split, or is that just for one? Or
I think it's a good question. I think it's really for the whole of the site, and how it's split between the entities is it's up to them. How do they want to decide how to split that up? So.
fascinating. Okay, thanks.
Do they own anything other than their buildings, Macy's and Nordstrom's?
Well, and the surrounding property.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just-
there are lots that
Yeah, but
include
not
parking
much,
lots.
yeah.
Okay. So on that map, thank you for doing that. And I think the exploration and the acknowledgement that some of the lots could also be merged is a very interesting discussion. If that map's going to be included in the ordinance, and I would actually highlight the entire area and kind of like as another key thing that say these ones could merge to basically meet this condition also, so that
Yeah, no. So the map itself would not be included in the ordinance, but certainly for if there was sort of a the consideration, frankly, if we're doing this, there's a reason why we're doing it, which is obviously to promote the idea and perhaps attract or let people know that that this is available if one should so choose. And as part of that, certainly a map could be put together that would actually discuss those those sites that currently meet a one, and give a little bit more information about, hey, there's opportunity here potentially.
So can you talk a little bit about what it would take to actually merge the lots to then go through this process? And is that a laborious and or difficult process? And is there a way that we would want to incentivize that also, just to bring other property owners into the discussion about potential
It's really not. I mean, it's done at the staff level. There's lot mergers. It's part of the. I'm trying to think of the government code section. Do you know that off the hand? But it's laid out essentially by state law about how one goes about merging lots and the requirements for doing so. There is notice and whatnot, but certainly it's done relatively often. I mean, it's not not general. We don't see it too often. I will say, though, for example, it's done in the context of identifying larger development sites. So the one recent example, or fairly recent example, was the San Clemente housing project, and the next door storage facility was actually merged in order to make a mix, sort of that development work and happen. So there are probably some considerations that I'm not, as a property owner, not sort of thinking through that, why you would want to or not want to do it. They have to do with tax purposes and other things. But it can be, for development purposes, it's not a difficult job. But Peter, did you want to?
No, I was just going to say that that's not regulatory framework. You would provide it as informational framework for anybody, and I'd be surprised if those property owners didn't know what their rights might be.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm new at
No, that's
so
fine.
I might be using it to learn myself. So I also want to talk about the flood. So it looks like we're referring them to have to do residential flood level. So we talked about whether it was commercial or residential and so did you do some background investigation? Who did you talk to? How did we come to the conclusion that the residential flood was the appropriate designation for these types of use?
Well, yeah, we did do quite a bit of research back when we were talking about the budget-in proposal, which we should now be calling the Evergreen proposal, or what have you. But in any case, I think why this, I'll start from the conclusion and then work my way back, but I think we felt it was appropriate to go with and define specifically that it should be built to the residential standards because there was ambiguity when we talked to various people about actually what a hotel should be built to or is required to be built to. For example, FEMA, when we discussed with the FEMA representative out of the East Bay section, I forget his name right at the moment, but the FEMA code actually says that hotels are commercial and can be dry flood proofed and actually not be raised above the base flood elevation in terms of the finished floor elevation. And then you go to the building code and the California building code, and it seems like there's more nuance to that sort of requirement that maybe, there's portions of the hotel that may be within the floodplain and be dry flood proofed, and then there's other portions which are more residential in character and would be required to be raised. So there was ambiguity, and I think given the conversation and the direction and the discussion that the commission had, and frankly the make it a cleaner, easier approach and sort of more straightforward for everyone, so we don't have to have that conversation again. And then also seeing how they were able to solve for that over at the Evergreen, we felt that just setting it at this has to be, of course you can, this has to be, the finished floor of the hotel has to be above the base flood elevation made more sense. That doesn't prevent somebody from putting, again, parking in the flood zone and whatnot, but the actual hotel itself should comply with the residential requirements.
Thank you for that one. Okay, one more, because I think we talked about it a little bit, but I think it's good to share with everyone else, because we talked about the environmental reward system, and it sounds like you've had some discussions with outside sources, and if you could just share a little bit of that process, because I think it's good to understand how you came to those in the broader,
Sure.
range that we could have explored and the justification behind it.
Sure. I think the tying this, I think one of the things about the environmental sustainability, and we've finding, was that this was the one that just naturally lent itself a little bit more easily to objective standards, given that those have been developed already in regulatory in other regulations such as LEED, or in California, the Cal Green, or there's green rating systems and other things. So there are already developed standards that actually essentially provide objective criteria in order to make or call yourself LEED Gold or Cal Green Tier 2 or Cal Green Tier 1. We felt that to use the Cal Green tiers was the appropriate standard for a number of reasons. It was appropriate to use in this ordinance because one, there's our applicants and our developers and people in California are already working within the Cal Green system. I mean, they're required to meet Cal Green, baseline Cal Green requirement in the building code. And some communities in many jurisdictions may have different already reach codes that say you're required to be at Tier 1, or you're required, I don't think there are any codes that say you're required to be at Tier 2, but there's a, this is where we are, and this is what's closest to our development community, I think. So that made sense from one perspective. Also, when you start looking into LEED requirements, there's some challenges there. In particular, you actually don't get your LEED certification until you're done with the project. And there's even some of the requirements to obtain the higher LEED standards requires ongoing monitoring and post operational requirements essentially at the end of the day, which don't really work in the context of a floor area bonus. You're already granting them the bonus, and then so having to make sure that their, these ongoing requirements are met, there's not much you can do you can't really, to take back the floor area at that point is a little bit, doesn't work so well. So I thought that was one issue with the lead. And that's some of the thinking. And then speaking with some folks at the county, we are, this is one where frankly we're looking at the end of the year, going to be updating our building code to a new 2019 code cycle here. So we've been working with folks at the county who are very close to the Cal Green standards and Cal Green, the different tier levels. So we had some discussions with the folks at Marin County who are closest to that. And just a note on this one, we may be having a discussion about making our standards a little bit higher this code cycle around, or at least those discussions are starting. We'll have to see where that goes. But if in fact, let's say we move the minimum requirements for the town of Corte Madera and all building construction up to tier 1, well, we may have to sort of look at this again at that point in time and sort of adjust things. But those are sort of the variety of different reasons, so hopefully that answers your question.
Fantastic, thank you.
Margaret Bando.
Sure.
Could you turn your microphone on, please, or speak into it?
Yeah,
Okay. Who, is it just private owners that own these parcels? Does the town have any ownership interest in the parcels at all?
No, the only one that is actually not privately owned is the DMV site in this map, which is obviously the state of California owns that. That one is this one here.
Okay.
Other than that, they're all privately owned. Yes, this would be the sheriff's.
That's
I
the
think the
sheriff.
sheriff is in this lot here,
Okay.
I believe. I'd have to confirm that, but
And so, where is the San Clemente housing project? That housing and where would
It's
that?
pointing
be?
at-
I think it's this
Right
lot
there.
here.
So that's already developed.
Correct.
So that's not available.
No, this is not, this is sort of really just a map showing not what is likely or it doesn't make any judgment about what would likely be developed, but just that it meets the minimum requirements for the ordinance.
Oh, okay.
Just for clarification, as Adam pointed out, most of those lots are developed. It's not.
Actually, all, yeah.
Not all of them. It's that if they were repurposed or reused or renovated.
Okay.
And there is, yeah, absolutely, there's relative likelihoods or, even the possibility that some of these would be developed for any other use has many different factors involved in whether
Because
something would.
Aren't there other restrictions with the lots being so close to the marshland?
Well, there may well be, but not that I know of offhand, but there may well be, but that would have to be taken care of. And when the development comes through, you'd still have the requisite
meet
environmental
those other
analysis such as what we've seen recently with other projects.
And does this, would the FAR only apply to hotel development,
Yes,
not apartment buildings?
Correct.
Or something else? Okay. And when you say you were talking about a hotel of significant size, what were you comparing that to? For instance, what of the list of hotels here that are in Marin County, what would you consider a hotel of significant size?
well, I think we're talking, it's hard to say exactly, but I guess I'm speaking of the acreage minimum requirement lot size. So if you have, 1 acre, the lot, that's 43,000 square feet. Let's say you have a little bit greater than a 1 acre size lot at 50,000 square feet. That means you could, at the very maximum, if you maxed out everything and came through the planning commission and met all the findings, you could get 0.7 FAR.
0.70, right.
So 50,000 times 0.7 is going to be roughly 2/3 of 50,000 is about 30, what is it, 37,000 square feet, maybe a little bit higher, about maybe 38,000 square feet of floor area for a structure of that, for a hotel, which is not, that is, that's not a big hotel by any means. If you look, let's see, if we look at the other,
No, I'm looking at like the Marriott Courtyard in Novato.
yeah,
That's 73 plus square feet, and that FAR would be lower than the maximum we would allow it to be.
the Marriott Courtyard.
Doesn't mean that it was exactly 1 acre.
2 above the town.
Right.
It says Corte Madera.
So, yeah, so it all depends on the lot size. So, I mean, it could be, so this lot, you could work it out and you could say 0.64, 73,000. You could do the calculation of what that lot was. It would be, that's probably 2/3, so that's almost a little bit over 100,000 square foot lot. So it just depends on the lot size. But I was saying significant just because this was of the requirement that sites be greater than 1 acre in size. And I think the reason, again, just to go over that, why that was proposed was because there are a lot of requirements we're putting on these hotels through the findings process in terms of site planning and having enough space really to accommodate other uses, even on the site, contributions to maybe things off the site, that are going to essentially be offset by, they're going to require sort of the additional development happen on the site in order to do those things, or enough room, I should say, on the site, enough land area to accommodate a lot of those things, including all the development requirements, such as parking and open space and fitting in terms of the mass with
Later.
adjacent uses and stuff like that. So, and again, that was, yeah, so I think if you wanted to use an example, we could, if you had one in mind, we could do a quick rough estimate of the size of a lot and project at the very maximum what size you could get. And even then, you have restrictions on height limit and setbacks and things that are going to constrain certain sites more than others. So,
I'm curious, Margaret, when you say similar, what is your thought process in making a comparison?
Well, I know the size in my mind of these different hotels. I've
Right.
seen the size that they are. And I'm trying to, and I see what their FARs are. I'm trying to get just a mental picture of what a hotel on one of those lots, what the size of it would be if they met the criteria for all of these things, which would be, I worked out a 7.0. They would get 7.0, and I'm looking at the hotels here that have a 7.0
0.7.
yeah, I'm sorry, 0.74, and it's between the Marriott Courtyard and the Embassy Suites in San Rafael, and I'm trying just in my mind
I think one thing to
sort of figure out what it's gonna be plopped down in Corte Madera.
Pretty hard to make that comparison, I think.
yeah.
But to your point is that I did the math, it's a 2.54 acre lot for the Marriott. So that's a big lot. I don't know if the inn comes close to that, just as a matter.
Oh, yeah, the inn's larger than that.
Okay.
But,
So,
yeah.
so I don't know that there are any others that are that size in that realm on the map right now.
But you also have to consider how many stories.
Yes.
Right.
That makes a difference too, and square
So-
footage.
Well, and
stuff.
I do think that's important as well, and I think in order to make the findings, there's a lot of consideration about context and scale and those design and aesthetics. So those things are going, it's not just plopping something down and saying you get 0.7 if it doesn't feel or look right. That's going to be, especially on the design one, that's a big part of that, meeting those design principles, is making sure that it fits in with its surroundings and whatnot. So that's where it becomes hard, and there is a height limit at 35 feet, so you're not going to get more than that with, you're going to be pretty constrained with that. And I think your point, I think maybe what you're getting is, can you get the 0.7 and make that work with all the different constraints that you have? And maybe that's just, maybe you're right. If you're comparing it to like a 4-story, what you see at the Novato Marriott or the Embassy Suites, those are pretty square boxy buildings that are just plopped down, and I don't think that's going to be
I would say then that
achievable.
what we've had before is sort of a sticky wicket to get to a good project. This gives us a lot of guidelines to get to a good project. We would never approve a Marriott as it was built in Novato with these set of check boxes, right? It wouldn't happen. That would
That's not
not
the intent,
work under under this checklist. So we're starting at 0.34, and if they did nothing, we'd still have design review and all those things in there. But if they didn't fulfill any of these other things, that would be the most they'd get.
I just want to be very careful about approving a project which might lead to the kind of things we've seen in Tamil Vista
But,
Boulevard.
yeah, I would just say that with this checklist, it's so precise and well-developed that a lot of the things we've been aiming at or talking about would be included in this table, and it'd be hard to hand out all 0.7 FAR.
And so, in the review process of this, who would be assigning the points that somebody was approved for?
Sure. So that's where in the first section, in the project conditions, under the, for example, 18-12-050, under conditions 1, 2, would be condition 2 and 3. But primarily 2, that's why we wanted to make sure that there was a preliminary hearing at a study session before the planning commission to discuss, and actually we spelled out specifically that the intent here was to discuss exactly that an applicant comes forth and they are requesting a certain number of points under this framework, and which equates to additional floor area ratio. And there's a preliminary evaluation of that before the planning commission about whether or not what they're proposing is feasible given the findings that are required to be met. And so there would be that feedback, and it's entirely discretionary at the end of the day whether or not those points are granted under this framework. Just like it's entirely discretionary, frankly, that the 0.34, even if you're under 0.34, that is achievable if the findings aren't met. I mean, those are always sort of the things that we talk about this all the time, even with home remodels and whatnot. There's and I think Commissioner Metcalf made sure we had the language in here about it's not a target, or what is the language I think we have in here?
It's not.
It's not intended as a target to be achieved,
Yes.
but rather as a maximum allowable. So there's always the discretion within that process, and we wanted to make sure that started at the earliest possible time at the preliminary hearing, that evaluation under this framework and those points were sort of evaluated right at the beginning, so that when an application is developed, there's already a sense of the type of, the size that is appropriate, given the variety of different factors they.
And did add to that is the application, as Adam pointed out, is discretionary. Even if you have that preliminary study session that you've seen some projects go through, be a discussion envisioned under the draft ordinance, that there would be a discussion by the planning commission of points and assignee, but it would still be subject to what they finally submit. Planning staff would still do their detailed review, compare it to what the commission direction was at the study session. It still comes back to planning commission for further discussion and decision. That preliminary is to give the guidance, but it's certainly not a final. You'll still have your full discretion at your planning commission hearing. And if it's a project, that requires any kind of council approval, then it would be subject to discussion by the council as well.
Does that give you any clarity on what the checks and balances are?
Some, yeah.
Some. All right, what's remaining, or what's in your
That's-
mind?
Well, I'm okay,
Okay,
I understand.
all right. Phyllis, did you have something else you want to contribute?
Adam hit on a little bit, just because a project meets the findings, has some of these extras to get the extra points, that still doesn't mean we're going to approve it as submitted. Use the vernacular, if it's ugly, we're not going to approve it, no matter how many of these little points they hit. I mean, we've been through this before, and that's what has to be understood. And as
Well, to be clear,
you said, if it doesn't say it's a given, the .34 or any of the others, there still has to go through the design review and other things.
right, and I think the one that is entirely, like you mentioned, you're hitting on design and aesthetics. So I think one key point, just to remind yourselves, is that all of the findings have to be met in order for any additional floor area to be granted. So you can do, an applicant could do great on community integration, environmental sustainability, public realm, but then there's 12 maximum points on the design and aesthetics section, and if it doesn't really hit these design principles that have been outlined in here, the point of that is really to provide the guidance to the applicant so that they do, but if they don't, that's the discussion to be had at that first preliminary hearing. It's, it's gonna have to do better, and here's how, maybe give some guidance on those sorts of things. So, and it's not a 0 or 12 either, it's sort of,
I guess my concern is just that, just a few meetings ago, someone stood up and said, well, we met all the
yeah.
requirements, and they felt almost discriminated against because they had met all the requirements, and yet there was something still holding their approval up. And I can see this just on a bigger scale. Somebody, corporate, standing up and saying, what are you doing? We've met all the requirements. It needs to be.
Those requirements are discretionary,
Yeah,
though.
this
so
is
you tell them
discretionary.
whether they make them or not. They
Right.
don't- There isn't,
I think we're trying, I
even the
think, actually, I think
bases-
actually,
I see a problem, though.
well, I think what we're trying to do is make it less of a problem than it was before we had something like this, which is I think more of where we were in past years, so.
An applicant making that statement is expressing their viewpoint.
Well,
It is not a fact, and that they may have met what they see are satisfactions, but we're the board, we're the discretionary review.
I'm trying to avoid
Right.
the issue.
And this gives us some tools. This is really great. I think in community integration, well, let me first say that for any single project to hit all of these 12 points is going to give it, they have to have the physical property plant to be able to do all of this stuff. They have to have all these, some of them don't have much street space to do much for bicycle lanes or those kind of things. So, the fact that they could even get to .7 is based on the physical restrictions of the property. Community integration has options for meeting some of these points, 6 maximum. and they might get, yeah, I think this restaurant or neighborhood serving retail is, a good sort of option for them to go, especially in an MX. They really got to work very, very hard to get anywhere near this after we decide that it's a project that meets all the other findings. So I think it's pretty cohesive. I don't know, kids.
I had one more little question that came up from our conversation. So, not that it's part of the ordinance, but the 35 feet, the height level, is that from the base level of the property before or after the development for flood? So if we're making them lift it up 5 feet, do then they get above that, or like?
Yeah, it's from the finished grade adjacent to the building, actually.
Okay.
And actually, I misspoke, that's C3 and C4 is 35 feet. Actually, the MX has that varied, it has the varied height. It has actually more like 25 to 30 feet in the front portion of the property, and then goes up 35 to 40 feet in the
So
back.
then they can almost get a fourth floor.
So, yeah, you could.
Depending on- And that doesn't, does that include mechanical equipment on the roof?
That can be in the flood zone. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, thanks for,
Right.
I was just,
Peter?
Yeah.
An example of the fact of giving a variance is, I don't know the name of the development, but over in Casablanca, what Mr. Hooper started out, that subdivision. There's 16 units there in 4 rows of 4, and the back ones, we allowed an extra couple of feet over the 35, because I think if it was rental, it was one thing, if it was for sale, it was something else. So in a project that works and everything comes together to make it work better, there could be a variance, but
Yeah.
it's not something you
Just-
aim for.
Yeah, and that one was a unique situation because that actually came through the density bonus ordinance
Oh, yeah,
and
there was-
concession, so it
Yeah, all
wasn't,
sorts
it
of
wasn't
things.
quite the same here, but yeah, I know what you're saying.
All right, that said, we have 2 members of the public here, so we'd like to open it up for public comment. Okay, so, sir. Well, we're going to give you going once, going twice, going 3 times, and if you're not going to comment, then, okay, then be that way. All right.
They like what we're doing.
So, thank you, we'll close that and bring it back here. So, let's get more specific and say how you feel about this proposed recommendation to the town council for what staff has written. Phyllis?
I think it's excellent. I think it's creative. It gives us meaning the town, the leeway to work things onto a property that benefits not only the developer, but the town itself and the things it could do. The only thing I asked about is whether or not .34 as the base was appropriate, if we should go up a little bit, and that's up to the other members of the commission. I mean, I can go either way. I just think a .40 might, for hotels, not for everything, might be a better base.
Okay,
But I certainly support it, and I support all the categories and the subcategories and everything else, and I commend Adam and the staff for a very good job.
Dr. Bundy?
No, I think it's a great plan, and I support it.
Okay. Mr. Lee?
I also think that it's well-written, and I think it creates a framework. I think, I'd also like the council, of course, I can recommend it to them to then fill in the final blanks as far as what's best for the town. But about the 3.34 to the 4, Phyllis, that you're bringing up, for me, it's about incentive. So even at the smaller, to get, it's about saying, yes, we want this amenity, yes, we want to guarantee you things, but, why what is the benefit to the community? And it's about incentivizing them to allow them to do what other building types cannot. And so to start off at that base level higher, I think it's kind of taking away the power of the ordinance, right? Like the ordinance at base, to get up there, it's not saying you can't, but it means that you have to start having this dialogue with the commission and the town to start thinking about it. So I personally would not want to do that and allow them to see the benefits of joining into this process and see how far they're willing to take it and what they can get out of it. So that's.
Okay. Margaret?
I think that I think the structure is really good, and I think it is a very creative way to look at integrating the idea of a hotel into the community. I think that's basically what it does. It allows the hotel to be part of the community. The only part that I don't really, or that I think needs some change or more specifics, is this public realm, the incentives in the public realm. It's very broad, so that if someone was, say, developing something on San Clemente, and they just couldn't figure out what to do, and they needed points, they could just go across town and put a bike path in some other place. I just think that if someone is building on a piece of land in one area, that's the neighborhood and the area that should benefit specifically from the building. I remember when the Best Western was being considered, I wasn't on the council, I was just listening. And they were talking about giving, building or doing something wonderful for a park up in Novato, when there was, when they were trying to.
No, that's mitigation, that's different.
All right, mitigation, yeah. And I thought, no, if you're taking land from somebody in not taking land, taking the benefit of the land from someone in Corte Madera, that's where the mitigation ought to be.
Okay, well, that was, I will just say.
And that's why I have a problem with this public realm part too.
That, I don't know that that's a fair comparison, because that was part of the EIR and part of a mitigation for something else. That wouldn't be a part of what this, but when I specifically hear, Adam, you can tell me whether the underground poles in the right-of-way would apply to someplace else in town. It's just on their street, right, as it would be the enhancement?
Well, again, I think that would be make the most sense if somebody was going to propose that, and certainly staff would encourage them to look in their immediate vicinity for something to qualify for this. But again, that would be specifically what they would want to come. First off, they're going to have the community meeting, so hopefully they get some ideas about what the community in that area would actually find useful. But secondly, they would come at the preliminary hearing in front of the planning commission, and that would be, I think, a very valid comment that we don't. Again, that's why it's structured as a maximum. There is no minimum here. So just because you're proposing streetscape beautification enhancement, and if it's in the totally wrong area, the commission would be well within its rights to say that doesn't get you any points because it's so far away from this neighborhood, that actually where you're developing it. So we'd like to see something actually much closer to the development. I mean, that's sort of how I think envision the conversation going.
In general, it's all within the town limits that
Oh,
we would.
yes,
I think
I
that's,
think
she
it's
was
within the
looking
town.
at a different process that took it outside of the town.
But I
it's
think the
within
point was
town.
it's even with
Well,
it.
no, I
That
think
was-
it should be within
A
the
defined
area
area.
of the development of that particular
But what if that
piece
area
of
is the
land.
nicest part of town and you need to distribute it to benefit the entire community overall?
I'm just saying,
it's a-
that's my feeling.
Well, we
about
have
it.
the option to
Right.
consider it or not. They
Right.
don't get it by right, just because they do telephone pole removal. We have the option to say, well, that's valid or not.
Yeah.
If they chose to put more hanging baskets up in town, we say, well, that counts or it doesn't count. They could do that as part of whatever they wanted, but it's not.
Was it proposed? Yeah.
it doesn't mean that they get those 3 points by any right. And our purpose is to evaluate it by criteria that's established here. They have some guidelines.
Wasn't that mitigation having to do with saving wetlands and stuff, and there weren't any here? I
And
mean, it
I'm
had
just,
nothing
I
to do
just
with the
remember
public
sitting
realm.
there, sitting and
I understand.
listening and
I
thinking,
understand.
why should another part of the county benefit from something that I felt Corte Madera was
Yeah.
needing to give up?
No, I
And
under-
so that's sort of on a smaller scale, that's what I'm saying. That's why I think that this is
Yeah,
a problem for me. It may not be for anybody else on.
no, I understand. And I think
Sitting here.
the way that I would, in the application on preliminary review, I can already see sort of how we would require them to, if you're applying for the hotel bonus, you would say, for the public realm section, we are requesting 2 points under the pedestrian category, and this is what we're proposing to do, and they'd have to identify the location of it and where it's gonna go, and then it would come in the preliminary review. And the goal really would be that they'd already have a community meeting, and so you'd get some comments from that. And then they would come to the preliminary hearing, and you would evaluate whether or not that deserves 2 points, 0 points, or not the right place, or what have you, and that conversation would be had. And maybe they go back and they have to come back for another study session at that point in time to get a better handle on that. But I understand the point of localizing the improvements in the public realm around where the development is taking place. Makes sense.
Margaret, anything else?
No.
Okay. I think, I wonder if workforce housing works out in that category, or environmental sustainability with, employee transportation programs, bike share, more of a, I'm just
Well,
wondering.
yeah, I think the way it would be, it doesn't really work with the Cal Green
Yeah.
criteria. And I actually, but and that's why I put it into the community integration category. Because I think at some point, I just feel that if we're going with the structure of
Environmental.
like the actual building design features, which are gonna achieve some environmental benefits through that, this is sort of more of a development approach that is
That makes sense. No,
more
I get it.
appropriate in the
Yeah.
community integration section.
Okay.
I think, and look, I have my own questions about that. I'm not sure that really .06 FAR is gonna be a great incentive for somebody to actually build new housing units on their site. But, this is a living document, it's not, that it doesn't, it can be revised and looked at again as you learn more and over time about what works and what doesn't work, but.
So let me ask a question just relative to that. Say they qualify for 6, is there any qualification program for, under hotel zoning, there is no qualification program for density bonus units, right? No,
Yeah.
there is none. So they'd have to be motivated to bring in workforce housing of their own accord. It wouldn't be a by right part of the application process.
No, right. It would have to be a choice to actually want to do that. And, I think we do have this is part of what we want to encourage, according with some general plan policies, is that our larger employers and larger commercial businesses are thinking about that. And this, I think, provides an opportunity, and a very, very real one, that they didn't have before, that now actually at least there's some additional floor area that one could get that sort of offsets that, the cost, frankly, that is associated with building housing where they're not a housing developer necessarily.
Okay, Phyllis?
I think rather than call it workforce housing, call it employee housing units. So it's shown that this is for the employees of the hotels, they can be ADUs or something like that. People can decide to rent them out to others, and I think it's important to keep it for the employees.
It-
It could be like the
I
ADUs.
think that's
and
a
stuff,
good suggestion, actually, because, yeah, workforce housing we use to mean in general
Yeah,
for the wider community, where I think the intention
Would be
really
the
was that
employees.
it's employees of the property.
so I would just
Okay, but
change
it-
that and list it that way.
Actually, I'll let the commission think about
Right.
that. It could be either or, but
So in
wanna
a,
restrict it.
in a land of fantasy, if somebody said, I want to put 8 workforce or employee housing units in there, we'd only be able to give them 6 points. So, and I'm thinking about that, we can't reward over this program. If somebody did a phenomenal job of sustainability, they get 12 points. So,
Well, the idea is that the way that staff crafted it, and there was a lot of thought and discussion, is you don't want somebody to just get the maximum just because they do sustainability, and because it really doesn't meet all the other criteria that you've all discussed. You want it to be a well-rounded program to meet that maximum and to get that extra bonus.
Right.
That was the whole idea. But if the commission wants to revisit that, but that was certainly a discussion and well thought out, is, to get your maximum points, you can't get it all in one category, is the way that it was intentionally set up. But that's certainly up for the commission's discussion and recommendation, but that was the intent.
thank you. And I think that the process laid out by which it goes through a study session first and then a public input session and then a study session and all of that, we've seen where that helps round out these applications to a better format and prepares it for staff. So I think that allows people to input with all of these conditions. Margaret, I'm thinking of you as I say that. So if we're done discussing it, then, yeah, we would add that to a motion if we were going to.
well, I think I would just, these aren't defined terms, right? So, but I think the way I would interpret the workforce housing, and obviously these are examples of what would potentially achieve the points here in this community integration category. Workforce housing I see as being available to not just potentially employees of the property itself or in that commercial enterprise, but potentially could be geared towards others in the community. Whereas if you change it to employee housing, or would like to make that recommendation, the distinction I would use would be targeted really just for the employees of the property, which, when I think about it now, may or may not, it may or may not be the flexibility you want. Yeah.
Can I ask a question about
Okay,
that then,
yeah.
on that topic? So,
Yeah.
workforce housing is like a planning like people are at, so is that usually the term, and is it open just to basically have smaller units for general areas, or is it really geared towards larger shopping centers or hotels to have their own staff live at the what is the overall planning goal and dialogue that you see in
Yeah, I think
larger
it's more
planning
towards
community?
the former, where it's workforce housing is a term that's used really to mean that it's for employees of a particular area that can work and live, that may not make the wages that
So they're usually
allows them
smaller
to buy.
units.
Yeah,
and-
they're usually smaller. I mean, we use the term, frankly, in the Robin Drive project regarding the ADUs. Really, that was the intended audience for those units in terms of workforce housing, teachers, public employees, and things that are not generally folks who would otherwise have to live elsewhere where it's cheaper.
I think there's more flexibility to keep it, and the current terminology is where the other one makes it specifically to.
I think it's more, I think if you used employee housing, like I said, I think it would be
Right.
a little bit more constraining.
And-
But that could be the intent, that it was really intended for those folks who are working in that, on the business.
But the
And-
reason
and-
we would incentivize is workforce housing ultimately leads to the city goals about smaller unit sizes and our overall housing stock, right? And so that's,
Yeah, I think it frankly would be very similar to the conversation we recently had on workforce housing and why that was seen as appropriate. So it was, yeah, either one would, I think, meet a lot of the goals of
based on
the
that.
housing goals of the town, and at least the portion of the housing goals that speak to workforce housing or varied unit sizes and housing for different types of households and whatnot. But either one would, I think, achieve those relatively equally. It's just a matter of which one is more likely to actually be built by I think that's the important decision, is actually more likely to be built by a business owner or a property owner who's considering this.
Did you have something you want to say, Dr. Bundy?
Yeah, I think the idea of using affordable housing or workforce housing with the caveat that the owner of the property, developer of the property, would be able to utilize this for employee housing as a preference. If he didn't have employees that filled that out, then it would be open to anybody for workforce housing.
Okay,
That works.
good, all right. Would someone like to make a motion about this?
Consideration and possible planning commission recommendations to the Corte Madera Town Council regarding approval of a zoning ordinance amendment related to a floor area bonus for hotels, motels in C3, C4, and MX zoning districts, resolution number 19-015. Anything else?
Second?
Second, all right then.
Commissioner Bundy,
Aye.
Commissioner Lee,
Aye.
Commissioner Mendel,
Yes.
Vice Chair Metcalf,
Aye.
and Chairman Chase.
Yes. All right then. That's really great. It's like a long time coming, 1.5 years, 2 years coming now.
Don't say that.
No, I just mean, you've been working on it.
But
So
it was done right, rather than...
it really was. So it's well placed. So we're moving on, and we're talking about reports, announcements, and
Okay.
requests.
Okay,
So,
I had the meeting, the council meeting.
yes,
Okay. Council met on Tuesday, April 2nd. 4 of the council members were there, 1 was absent, and they, most of it was the hearing on all these notes and get a public hearing regarding the preserve residences. Adam gave a very clear, concise presentation. Very few questions were asked by council members. They passed the 3 resolutions. Well, it's the first reading for the zoning, the change, approval, et cetera, unanimously on a 4-0 vote. They accepted what we had proposed, which was option 2, that was moving the homes that were on Paradise Drive. There were 2 units, I think it was lots 6 and 7, back from the street. It was supported by the fire marshal. 2 people spoke in favor of it. 1 couple that had questioned it and had sent us emails were satisfied. And the only thing they did is there were restrictions having to do with the ADUs being, normally you have to have the owner live in one of the properties, and we made this exception, and they followed through, and they just wanted some wording added, even though it was implied that if there was a change of ownership and the lot was sold, the usual restriction for ADUs would go into place. And I don't know, is there anything I left out, Adam? I think that was all on that particular one. Other than that, it started out with the presentation by the MMWD trying to give an overview of the reasons they ought to have the rate increase, and plus the additional fee added to the property tax. Everybody was not excited, let's put it that way. And then I just wanted to go over the reports first. From Todd Cusimano, he reported that the CHIPPR program is officially in the works, and they're now setting the schedule up. And also the ordinance asking about clearing brush from their properties, and he emphasized there'll be a focus on enforcing this ordinance. We're all concerned about fire. And that was essentially it. A meeting that was expected to be kind of difficult because of the preserve wasn't. The council was very complimentary towards Adam, the staff, and to us for having done the job that enabled them to move forward.
Yeah, I think it went over well.
Yeah.
When it came to the MMWD thing,
That didn't go over well.
yeah, well, a council member was inferring that building valuations were higher because they had a sprinkler system in commercial properties. Right? In a way. I don't know
Yeah.
if you remember that, Adam. As if, but those all properties are required to have those sprinkler systems. So,
Well, I don't know if single-family residential in some neighborhoods are not, but multi-units and commercial all have to have it.
yeah, so, and then his point was that the water sitting in the pipes is not getting built. And that somehow that system was adding to the value of the property, but those properties all have to have sprinkler systems, so it's not a issue. I'm just thinking,
Yeah.
you know, this is a informational thing about properties with sprinkler systems are required.
But the water district a couple years ago raised the rates and stuff. This is something they do quite often and don't look at their costs, and it is very controversial in the county. And the system that is used, which is state law, it's not something they made up, is they have to receive letters objecting to the raise of fees from, was it 50% plus one? Or some figure, and if they don't, and I mean, most people don't even know to send a letter saying, I don't want you to do this. So anytime they come up with this, they go ahead and do it. But that's state law that allows it. It's not a system they came up with themselves, or we would have gotten rid of it
didn't
a
know
long
that,
time
yeah.
ago. There was something else I'd like to report on, if I may, and that is two things having to do with marijuana.
I don't know, can she report on that? No.
We can't discuss it, but I could just bring it up. I wanted to talk about the ordinance, the two ordinances that are coming up, just so people are aware.
Okay.
One is, and I did send an email to Adam, and I think I copied you, and I haven't gotten the number of the bill, so I can't get details. But someone is carrying a bill that in a town that more than 50% of the people voted for recreational marijuana, that the town would be obligated to have a dispensary. The other thing I wanted to mention is as of today, it's 25 different cities or towns or jurisdictions in California are part of a lawsuit against the state to stop the delivery from out of their jurisdictions.
Right?
So, I mean, they're coming at it from two angles, and just wanted everybody to know since it's a topic that's come up.
Okay, no, that's good. All right. I think the date for that for the council is when?
We're actually, yeah, I think we're on to the second meeting in May at this point.
Hopefully we'll have more information on this ordinance and see who's
Yeah, we'll see.
carrying it and what the number is.
Okay, thank you, Phyllis. Adam, do you have something you want to tell us about anything?
Yeah, I might as well. Phyllis already talked about the council meeting, so I won't go over that, but that has been approved, obviously. So if you blinked last week, you probably missed the demolition of the Denny's building, but that happened very quickly. All of a sudden, it was gone. But the sign, that's a good sign that actually we'll see the construction happening soon. We did have the state of the town. A couple of you were there, and that was great to see there. I relayed. I thought it was a nice event, as it always is, and I relayed a couple of just pieces of information that you may be interested in. Just that our building permits, the number of them that have been issued, continue to just escalate year by year. So we're 715, I think, last year were issued up over. We're at 670 in 2017, and I think we were down at 600 in 2016. And anyways, it keeps rising, as well as the valuation, which in 2015 and 16 of the projects was in the $20 million range in 2015 and 16. And this last year was in about $60 million worth of project valuation, which it's also a sign of the larger projects that have been, an investment that people have. But it's not just the big projects. That actually about a third of that was, or more than a third of that was residential remodel construction, and not big projects. So a lot of building activity out there. That's all. I'll just report on that. I'll come back to the commission at some point. We're starting to pull together some information on sort of the first reports are coming in, demographic analysis of Tam Ridge apartments, and just sort of some information and some interesting information just about where people work and where people came from who are living there now, and both breaking that out from the market rate and the affordable units that I think you'll be interested in. So we'll have that, and then we're also going to follow that up with some traffic-related information as well. So be on the lookout. I'm sure there'll be lots of interested members of the public and commission members and others who will like to hear that report. We're going to try to bring that to the council. Just it's a busy time with the budget coming up, but we're going to try to make room for a report on that. And then Friday, actually, staff went and visited the Enclave condominium project down on Casa Buena, which is just now in the process of getting their certificate of occupancies, and two have sold. The market rate ones in the back for each like 1.5 million.
Is that the Hooper? What I think of as the Hooper?
Yes, yeah.
Where is that?
On just off of Casa Buena Drive, as you go up
Joe's.
past Joe's and down near next to the highway. Three of those units are affordable, but so those are wrapping up and will be occupied fairly soon. And that's about it. I did want to mention that on next agenda, while it says none here, we are looking at potentially a monument sign at the town center, or one that is similar to what you've seen out there, but in a different location. There's an application that is in for that may make its way, and there was another potential item that I can't recall right now. So we'll be back to you shortly with. You'll either see a notice this Friday or not on the upcoming agenda. And with that, I don't have anything else to report at this time, other than I'll let you all know how the National Planning Conference goes, because that's going to be in San Francisco. I'm going to be attending on Sunday and Monday, and so it's nice to have it so close to home. And you'll see a lot of planners with wacky ideas around San Francisco. So
Looking forward to hearing what's new and innovative in the world of planning.
You'll have to give us a report next meeting.
Yeah. Okay, so we have two sets of meeting notes to review and approve. We have meeting notes for February 28th and meeting notes for March 12th. Are there any notes, changes, or otherwise on the February 28th meeting notes?
No?
Move to approve.
Second?
Aye.
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 Then March 12th.
Move to approve.
Second?
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Okay. We're going to adjourn this.